بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Last night we spoke a little bit about the definition of the Quran. So hopefully you guys remember that. And one of the things about the definition that I wanted to pick up on today was the fact that the Quran is revelation. Now I know that sounds, okay, we know that it's pedestrian, but just bear with me for a moment. We say these things and then we kind of move on. What is revelation? Because revelation is something that we don't have anymore. There used to be a discipline or a science called ilm al-namus. And namus is the act of the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to a prophet. When Lady Khadija alayhi salam took Sayyidina Muhammad to her cousin, Waraq ibn Nawfal, who was a Christian, he said, this is, and described what happened in Ghar Hira, he said, Waraq said, this is an-namus, this is the namus that came to Musa alayhi salam. So this is something that people knew at the time. Of course, there's no namus expert now because there's no more revelation. So revelation is what the Quran is about, al-wahy. Now, the reason it's important that we, understand what this means is that people today, we are very, very strange in the kind of information that we accept. So some people are driven by their dreams, not like their aspiration, I mean their dreams, like they fall asleep and they have dreams and they are conducting their life based on their dreams, which is very dubious because you could have had indigestion the night before and the dream was about that, not that it was like a big message or something like that. But the dream state is a very small portion that kind of indicates for us what was happening with revelation. The other side of the spectrum is we have people that are really into mushrooms, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, all these type of things. And they go on this trip and they feel illuminated. Have you ever talked? I've talked to these people. It's very interesting. I tell them, tell me what you experienced. Oh, I can't really explain it, but it was something else. I said, well, that's the problem. The problem is that you cannot explain it. So if you cannot explain it, then it's very difficult to define it. And if you can't define it, then it's going to be very difficult to replicate the same type of result. In our faith tradition, replicating the type of result, spiritual result, is very important. That's why we refer to our spiritual science, the science of tasawwuf, as a science. It's not just whirling around and walking barefoot in the forest. That's maybe one version of it or a byproduct of it, but it's something that's replicable. And it's the repeated nature of the revelation that comes to us through all of the traditions that the Prophet ﷺ described for us what happened to him. So there were different ways that the revelation would come to him. So the ulama, they say there are three broad types. Of course there are subgroups, but there are three broad types of revelation. One revelation, which is the most direct, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to the Prophet ﷺ directly, without any veils, without any intermediaries, like in the Isra and the Mi'raj. Now, of course, when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke directly to the Prophet ﷺ, it doesn't mean that Allah spoke the way that we're speaking, that air comes out of the lungs and it travels, the waves travel to the ear, and that's material. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, laysa kamithlihi shay. Nothing is like Allah ta'ala. Allah's beyond that. But rather it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying be, and it is kun fayakun. And at that instant, those words and that message appear on the heart of the Prophet ﷺ directly. And then there's another type of revelation which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Prophet ﷺ min wara'il hijab, from behind some kind of veil. The Prophet ﷺ hears a voice. Some of the Sahaba said, when the Prophet would receive revelation, we would hear as if there was a swarm of bees humming around him. So they could hear it. There was something physical that the Sahaba said, oh, that's the revelation is happening, we should leave him alone. There were no bees or anything, but there was like that humming sound of the bees. The Prophet ﷺ also described, that's like a light version of it. The Prophet ﷺ described that sometimes the revelation comes to me like the ringing of a loud bell, and this is the most difficult of revelation for me. It would be a loud ringing sound. Sayyidah Khadija would say, or I think it was Sayyidah Aisha who said, he received revelation one time in the winter, but he was sweating profusely. So even though it was cold outside, his body physically got heated. In another narration, he was on his camel when the revelation came to him, and the camel buckled and it fell to the floor because of the weight of the Prophet ﷺ. So there's this physical aspect of him receiving revelation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course, there's the more common form of revelation, the third kind, in which Gabriel is the intermediary. Now, when Gabriel came to the Prophet ﷺ, he would oftentimes come in the shape of a man. Does anyone know which companion Gabriel used to take the form of? Who? Mean? You guys speak all the time, and when I ask a question, everyone's mumbling. Speak up. Who is the Sahabi? La Dihya al-Kalbi. Dihya al-Kalbi radiyallahu anhu. He was a very handsome Sahabi, and he was one of the ambassadors of the Prophet ﷺ. Actually, he was sent to, who was he sent to? No, not Al-Habash. You only have like 2 more guesses. Not Pharaoh, that was before. No, he was sent to the Byzantines, to the Romans. He was handsome, he looked very attractive. And Gabriel oftentimes took the form of Dihya radiyallahu anhu. Like in the hadith of Gabriel, when a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him the 3 questions, Gabriel came in the form of a man. Only twice in the Prophet's life ﷺ did he see Gabriel in his true natural physical form. The night of the initial revelation, Laylatul Qadr in the month of Ramadan, and the night of the Isra and the Ma'raj. And this was a very intense thing because the angels are not, even though they're made of light, whereas we are made of earthly matter, they are made of light, a light matter, like light, nur, not, light, both meanings of the word light. The angel is a massive creation. So when the Prophet ﷺ described Gabriel, he said he had over 600 wings. And when he manifested, I couldn't see anything except Gabriel. So if you stand here and you're outside and you just stand there and you look, everything that you see in your peripheral vision in front of you and to the side of you, all of that was Gabriel. The Prophet ﷺ couldn't see anything else except Gabriel. So the angel, the malaika, are these intense creatures. And that's why they come to the assistance of the Sahaba, and they fight in the Battle of Badr, and they fight in the Battle of Uhud, and in other times in Islamic history, because they are these fierce beings. عَلَيْهَا مَلَائِكَةٌ غِلَادٌ شِدَادٌ لَا يَعْصُونَ اللَّهَ مَا أَمَرَهُمْ وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. Allah Ta'ala describes the angels guarding the hellfire as these intense beings, and they do not disobey Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala because angels have no free will, like we and the jinn kind, but rather they are under the command of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So Gabriel oftentimes came in the form of a man, and the Sahaba would think he was a man, but then when he sat down, he's like, oh, okay, this is not a man. It's like in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. When the angels came to Abraham, they came to him in the form of men. So that's why he brought food. And then when he looked at them, he's like, oh, you're not people, you're something else. فَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً. So he became a little frightened when he saw the angels. And then twice, as I said, Gabriel manifested in his true form. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because it's part of our tradition. So we need to know that that's what revelation is. But it's also important because there's no way that somebody for 23 years could fake all of this. You can't say that this person was mentally ill and would go into some kind of trance and a spell and then made this Quran up. Because if he did that, that spell that he went into would look the same more or less every time. But this is a wide gambit of experiences from the eyewitnesses, from the Sahaba, from the testimony of the Prophet himself, from the witnessing of his wives, who in the beginnings, especially Lady Khadija was the closest to him. There was a physical change in the physiology of the Prophet when he would receive revelation. And it happened in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it was a verse, sometimes it was an entire surah, sometimes the act of revelation would be a moment, sometimes it would be a deep experience. And that's why Umar radiallahu anhu, when the Prophet passed, he said, no, he's not, he did not pass away, he's just with Allah, he's receiving revelation. So they were used to these type of things happening. But for 23 years, no one could do this, sustain this if it was fake. No one could sustain this if it was false. So the act of revelation is something that is quintessential for us understanding the Quran. That this came to the Prophet ﷺ in this way, impressed upon the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, such that he would not forget it, such that it became a part of who he was. So there was no issue of recall, there was no issue of missing a verse here or missing a verse there. And after the revelation would come to the Prophet ﷺ, he would immediately state to the companions what he was revealed to him, because that's one of the obligations of a prophet, that he has to do balagh, he has to inform. And then the Sahaba would, some of them would write it down, on bones or little skins and things like that they had, and some of them would memorize them. And then during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, it was collected in one mushaf. We'll talk about that later. So of the definition that we talked about yesterday, I just wanted to highlight the issue of revelation. I want you to understand how the Quran came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then the rest of the times, the evenings, we'll talk about how it has been preserved, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Shukran, warahmatullah.